I think that there's a little bit of a bounce back spot, as weird as it is to say, after grinding out a big win last week against an Iowa State team that, they easily could have lost with the way their offense was playing. Their defense found a way. But I think Jalen Daniels is going to get back on the right track in this game. TCU has speed everywhere, as you and your team just saw last week, Trevor. First of all, do we think that this Kansas team is for real? Yes or no? Pack, let's go to you first, and then we'll go back to Trevor.
Well, I think it's tough. It's one of those teams that's had a lot of success, and you don't really have a lot of background on them. I mean, last year up and down, whatever, but they just not a lot of track record, not a lot of things going their way from that standpoint. So I think it's hard to really pin whether or not they're for real, but they are 5-0. So you have to give them credit there. They're winning football games. I thought last week they struggled offensively and they still found a way to win. Or the Iowa State game, was that last week? I'm pretty sure that was last week. Yeah. They struggled offensively and still found a way to win. And that's something that I think a struggling football team or a team that's just hot and cold, they'll find a way to screw that up usually in that situation. I think that to get out of that unscathed and the way they did it, I thought defensively they played really, really well. It's a good thing moving forward for them. I fully expect that offense to turn back around, especially against this TCU team who they've been scoring a lot of points. They've been giving up a lot of points, and they've been giving up a lot of points to some lackluster teams offensively that don't have the firepower Kansas has. So, not to get ahead of myself, but I do think this Rock Chalk team is serious. They're a contender, Rock Chalk Jayhawk. And I look forward to a lot of fireworks this weekend against this TCU team as well.
Who does a high-scoring game benefit more, right? Both these teams have won football games that have been in the 70s and up this season. Does that benefit TCU more coming off of the way they just steamrolled Oklahoma last week, or is it both teams? Is the answer just whoever executes better? Trevor, what do you think?
I think it's an execution deal. Max Duggan's playing some of the best football of his career at TCU. We'll see if he can put another one together this week. I take myself back and put myself back in playing in the Big 12, where I'll just be honest, Kansas coming up on the schedule, you got the coaching staffs game planning not only for that week, because it is 1 week at a time, but they're already looking at the next week ahead. It is that's how bad Kansas was year in and year out, to where, yeah, they've got players, they got dudes on scholarship, you got to go in there and handle your business, but something would have to go incredibly wrong for it to even be a tight game. This year's different. This year, especially going to Lawrence, I don't know what it would be like to play in a full stadium there. It never happened for me. You're going to play in front of a full stadium. They're probably bringing in extra bleachers because it's a glorified high school stadium. College game day. The Kansas faithful is going to be going nuts. You've got great quarterback play on both sides of the game. I do think it will be a higher scoring matchup than what we saw last week against Iowa State. For the Kansas team, TCU obviously showed they could put up a lot of points this past week as well. It's going to be a shootout. And to answer your question about Kansas being for real, you got to respect them. I'll say that. I think that they have put themselves in a position. They got to win one more game, and they're going bowling, which is phenomenal and a great accomplishment for Lance Leipold and that group. But you have to respect Kansas each and every week. If you're Oklahoma State, if you're Oklahoma, if you're Texas, doesn't matter who you are. And that's saying a lot for a group out of Lawrence that has really got a good culture going right now.
To me, Kansas is the ultimate trap team right now.
That's
even though they are ranked, to like kind of go back to what we were talking about trap game. Like Kansas is a trap team right now, and they're getting recognition behind it. But they're still like, there's just not a lot on them. So you can't even really go back last year. Like when you're game planning for this team, you're game planning just on this year, because at last year's tape and the year before that's tape and probably 10 years before that's tape, going all the way back to Todd Reesing, wasn't worth a shit. So they are the trap team because they got a lot going for them from that standpoint.
Yeah, to that point, I've been fighting myself all week in prep for all of these shows and talking about where I'm going to place my bets. I've been fighting my heart. It's the head versus the heart, because my heart tells me I love this team. There's going to be so much juice in that stadium. If they're going to get into a high-scoring game, that benefits the Jayhawks. Everything's set up for a marquee win. The head tells me that as soon as they play a team that they just can't stop, this could get ugly. And I don't know if TCU is that team. I give Kansas a ton of credit for what they did defensively last week to find a way to win, like you said, when their offense wasn't firing. But I just saw TCU just steamroll Oklahoma last week. And if they're going to do that to Oklahoma and the athletes that defense has, regardless of what the defense is right now, like, can they not just do that to Kansas? That terrifies me.
Well, here's the thing. To Trevor's point, Max Duggan's having a hell of a year. I think he's got the 4th best QBR in the country. He hasn't thrown a pick yet this year. So if you don't have a guy who's going to, who if it is a shootout and you got a guy who's not going to turn it over on the other side or hasn't done it yet to up until this point this year, that's tough, because then you really have to go toe to toe, and it's ultimately going to come down to coin toss and who, did you double up at halftime, or it's going to be something goofy like that, a special teams play, which you really don't want to happen. So, that's the only thing I think that you can look at. That's if it does turn into a shootout and he continues to take care of the football, that's going to be tough.
I'll say this too about Kansas and the way their schedule laid out for them. They've played 2 Big 12 games, West Virginia and Iowa State, both of which, to your point, you can't even look at last year's film for Iowa State because they're a completely new team in a negative way. They don't have Charlie Kolar and some of these big time, Breece Hall, these guys that carry their team for several years. They're not a very good football team. So Kansas got one there. Now, like you said, found a way to win. It's awesome. They're taking a step up. And then West Virginia has played abysmal football up until this point. Several losses. Looked horrible against Texas this past week. Looked like the Kansas of the Big 12 in previous years, in my opinion. So Kansas still got to go play Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas State and Baylor and Oklahoma State. Like, they got a lot ahead of them as well, but still, like we've said, kudos to Kansas at this point. Greg, you made a great point. What's going to happen when they face somebody that they just can't play with? And I don't think they've seen that team quite yet.
Yeah.
And they certainly will. The question is just, is that TCU this Saturday, or does it come down the